Everyone, this is Tony Holbein. You are listening to the Revenue Formula with Mikkel and Tony. In today's episode, we are talking about why you should not start your own podcast. And we are sharing our experiences from having run a podcast now for over 200 episodes. Enjoy.
So the other day, those kids, they're so like the stuff they say and the reasons they have not to do things is just hilarious. So yesterday, I've picked up the kids. We come home from daycare and school, and my daughter, who's 4, sits down on the floor going like, "Dad, I'm really tired. I can only lift my iPad."
Yes. It's a totally valid reason.
No, it's like, and that, I think about it, it's 1 kilo. And that sets very real limitations for what she can and cannot do. Like swipe.
I just love it so much. I can so imagine like this child voice in Danish saying this. For some reason in Danish it gets a little bit better even for some reason. I don't know why.
No, exactly. It's just like butterfly in German. It gets better. It's like beautiful.
So I told my oldest one like, hey, if you watch too much TV, your eyes are gonna turn rectangular.
Yeah.
Right, because that was the thing that people used to need, like
all the parents.
I don't know, very long ago. It seems like, and he's spending some time at his grandpa today.
Yeah,
and I was like, right, you and grandpa, you're gonna watch a lot of TV, huh? And he was like, yeah, I think grandpa's gonna get rectangular. Oh, man. It's like, yeah, you totally got it.
By the way, I just want to point out to the listener, we are good parents. It's not like we park them in front of the TV or an iPad 24/7. I just want to put it out there.
But also, I thought this would be a great segue to say, and to not have rectangular eyes.
Oh yeah, you listen instead.
you should listen to a podcast instead.
Well, actually,
isn't this?
Yes.
Come on.
I mean, my son, he probably could understand because he's getting better with English. Like honestly, it's a thing. So yeah, I think it's a good segue. Let's go with that.
And
that is
and
decided.
I think by now everyone is like, okay, come on guys, get over with it.
Yeah.
It's like,
and you're gonna do an episode about podcasts right now. I'm so done with this show. It's over. Like it used to be cool when it was all these CAC payback analyses, and
then they talked about AI suddenly the whole time.
Oh man, no. So we have a bit of an anniversary. Actually, we've done about
Mikkel and I.
200. We've done about 200 episodes of this show. Boy, did that go fast! I remember you and I.
Did it go fast?
Yeah, I remember you and I sitting in a room at a round table that was clearly too small, sharing a microphone, saying we're gonna give it a year. And here we are, like almost 3 years later, still at it.
Is it 3 years? No,
almost,
really?
No. But getting closer. I think it must be 2.5.
Jesus,
it must be 2.5. And we've at least got a chance to meet a ton of great people. We've covered so many subjects. Also met a lot of just honestly wonderful people through them listening to the show, us, hitting it off on LinkedIn and stuff. So I think that's just been quite amazing. And so naturally, we wanted to talk about why you shouldn't do a podcast today.
Yeah, don't do it.
It's obvious. Yeah,
it's like
done.
It's not a good idea.
Thanks so much for listening. Make sure to like, subscribe. I hear that's free.
By the way, the subscribing part, I think we need to have this and this is where we're going to the first, tactics here. Actually, the call to action to subscribe should be much earlier in the show. So totally. Now that you're listening to this, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. Especially if you've been like 5 episodes deep, dude. I mean, it's time.
No, it's also why the top performing AEs, then they start by sending out the doku sign and then proceed to demo, depending on how that goes. So why is it podcasts are so sexy and attractive? Maybe we just start off there before we going into why shouldn't you do it and all the misconceptions around it. Why do you think this is actually something that comes up in a conversation as some of the businesses around the world?
So I think initially people think like, it's not kind of easy to do. I mean, you just have 2 people, you talk a little, you do a little bit of cutting here and there, and then you push this thing out and then it's done. It's much harder to, write a piece of content and, kind of push that out into the world. So just people having a conversation, that's pretty easy. Sometimes I even hear people, and, at some point my thought was the same thing, was like, oh geez, you and I, we had just such a great conversation. If we would have had hit record on this, I'm sure 1,000 people would want to listen to this.
Exactly.
You know,
but it's,
and this kind of thinking, I think a couple of people have that.
Yeah, it's so funny. It just made me think about, I saw Christopher Waltz, famous actor, German, by the way. He was in a morning talk show over in the States, and the talk show looks at him and goes, boy, you're just so good at playing the bad guy. How do you do it? And he just does that, like, I will say that Christopher Waltz face, only he can do. And he just says, I'm an actor. It's like, well, true. And I think it's just to say, yes, you might be able to speak, but once you hit record and have a microphone, something just happens to people. I can't explain it, but something just happened. It happened to us, I think, initially as well. You need to get used to it, and there's kind of that piece. So I think you're right.
We saw big guys crumble in sweat.
Oh,
like crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
Including ourselves at the beginning. Where I thought you wanted to go with this actor thing is, I think after 200 episodes, I think it's about time to reveal to the world that Mikkel and I actually hate each other.
Yeah.
We're working so hard. It takes so much skill, so much effort to be like laughing and cracking jokes and be like all like agreeable on those shows. But it's actually kind of, once the camera's off and the recording is done, we're at each other's throats or just kind of walk away.
I can only recommend, like, what we're doing is recording async. So Tony records his part and then I'm just watching and doing my bit. So that always works. No, I think you're right, by the way. I think there's also, people just assume that it's easy to figure out how you want to run this show. I think a lot of things are just being taken for granted, because when you look at this product, it's fairly simple. It's a 25, 30-minute episode. How hard can it actually be to do? And I'm just telling you, it is quite difficult, let alone getting someone to listen to it, right? So I think that's one side. And I think the other is, somehow it feels like when I look at Harry Steppings, I'm like, boy, he is famous. And you know what? Probably he is to a degree, but I think there's just that kind of natural appeal that, well, all I have to do is the same thing as he did for like 10 years, and then I'm Harry. How hard can that be? And I think
we're 20% in.
We're
basically 80 million out of the 400 million fund that you raised. We're basically at 80 million already.
Yeah, so
like it's easy, you know.
So I think maybe you're right. That's part of it. Also, like the ability to meet other experts in a field, like, hey, do you want to hop on a podcast? It's just different than, hey, do you want to hop on a Zoom call? You know.
By the way, I think that is like one of the major upsides of doing a podcast, especially with guests. Yeah, we'll get into guests, kind of the ups and downs on that in a second. But actually meeting those folks is pretty fantastic.
Yeah. So let's say for now, that's like probably why a lot of folks go into it. So why shouldn't they actually do it?
So, I mean, we just talked about some of the misconceptions here, right? And basically, if you listen to it carefully, you just reverse the whole thing and realize, so it's not that, you're telling me it's not that easy?
Yeah.
So I think there's a bunch of work that needs to happen around, obviously, kind of the content and the setup and so forth. Kind of there's work around this, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's a little bit also like going to the gym, which obviously, clearly, if you're on YouTube, neither of us does. But it's like you need to stay consistent, right? So we had a couple of times you're like, oh, let's just skip today. And it's like, no skipping. It's not allowed, right? And I think keeping that up, I think that is really difficult, right? Then, thinking about new content all the time. I mean, 200 episodes,
it's a lot of stuff.
And we're not pulling a Chris Walker. Sorry, Chris. I'm sure you're not listening anyway. But it's like it's the same stuff, right? He talks about the same things all the time. So kind of coming up with 200 new pieces of content, I think that's exhausting. Yeah. And this is just on the effort side.
Yeah.
And then the next thing is like, well, what does all of that get me?
Yeah.
Right? What am I buying with all of that work? And to be honest, folks, I'm not so sure. So I can maybe it makes sense to go a little bit into what our reasoning was in the beginning, how it has morphed and so forth, and whether it worked out.
We just thought it was cool, so that's why.
I was really like, oh, this could be my way to stardom, basically. You know, that's how I could become a celebrity finally.
Yeah.
I think the main thing that we wanted to achieve, yes, we kind of read the founder brand from Dave Gerhardt.
Yeah.
Like that was a piece. But really it was about, well, let's go on LinkedIn, start doing some content there. And then the content that we see resonates, we can actually use that in other areas. For example, in the newsletter, which we also, sign up, the revenue formula on Substack, sign up if you haven't, pushing stuff out there every other week or so right now. And then using similar content pieces for the podcast and kind of having these things reinforce each other a little bit, that felt like a smart idea to do, right? In terms of creating, having multi-use for each of the different pieces of content we generate.
Yeah.
The purpose that we wanted to achieve, though, was for people to get to know us, trust us, maybe even become friends of, some shape or form. And yes, ultimately kind of using that in order to boost revenues as at Growblocks, right? Kind of that was the idea. And the reason why we ended up with this specific approach was in the beginning of Growblocks, we were basically being a consultancy professional services company, right? We didn't have a product for 1.5 years, maybe even a little bit more into the journey. So how do you generate business in a professional service company is like through trust and through people, and they kind of hear something from it's like, oh, cool, maybe you should talk to Tony or these Growbox guys. And that was kind of the purpose, right? Kind of get more people to get to know us, see that we kind of know what we're doing, and then from there go into I should really check out these Growblocks guys and maybe kind of go further than that, right? I mean, am I, is there some revisionist history here where I'm just taking some of the things that we learned and kind of smashing that in there, or was that our starting point, Mikkel? I forget.
I think it was, but I think from the onset, we knew we had no product to market. So what can we advertise? The founder. Like that was one of the reasons, right? So if I will say at a post Series A startup, you have other things to prioritize, quite frankly. So the question really becomes, is it worth the time committed is? Because you already have stuff to market, right? So that's just one side of it. The other is we didn't look at the podcast in isolation. We didn't say, we're going to start a podcast and nothing else. It was like, no, because we need to build a founder brand now, and we need to educate the buyers on the problem and this direction we're going. We need more than just the show. So you were kind of already active on LinkedIn. We scaled that. We also created a newsletter around it, right? So it was kind of a package. And the reason, or at least in hindsight, I think one of the benefits of that actually is, so we said the 200 episodes is really difficult. It's because coming up with these content ideas, it's a muscle. Once you have, I don't know if you've ever tried like fitness, like weightlifting. If you've ever done it and you just wreck yourself for the first time ever, you're going to have like a week of pain. Basically, you're going to have a week of torture where your arms and legs and everything just hurts.
Or you're just aging.
Oh, you're just aging is one of the, but that's going to be like, it is really difficult to start, even again, once you've had a break. Like there's something that happens when you think about a podcast episode, think about a newsletter, think about a LinkedIn post, those things start meshing. You start observing things that other people write, whatever it is in the news, or, you start picking up on certain things that become stories you then want to tell, right? That become your point of view. So I think the purpose for us was we had nothing to advertise. So I don't feel it's revisionist history though. So yeah.
No, I think that's true. So basically also what we're saying, the situation that need to be in for this to make sense needs to be very particular.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think the next thing also is like, let's just say you're a marketer and you're like, maybe I should do a podcast here. I think it's also a great way to kill your career. Like, because, the way you're going to do it is you're going to try and, boot this up, and maybe you can't do it yourself. So you need to recruit people that actually are on the show, and it's going to be lots of friction, to kind of get this thing going. And then it's going to take you a lot of time to show anything for it, right? So we are like, again, 200 episodes in. I don't think, so we're not like a mass market product or something like this, right? Kind of, we're not, we're niche-y. I think we could be bigger in the niche. So that's kind of clear for us. But we're around like 5,000-6,000 downloads a month, or listens, or whatever the or views, however you want to call that on the different, platforms. So, is that a lot? I don't know, maybe. But if it is the right 5,000 to 6,000 people, then it starts to become pretty much a lot, actually, right? Yeah. But getting to this point, I think it takes a while. Yeah. It takes a while.
I think if you were to consider doing it now for a different purpose, that would make sense. It's for some of the differentiators, like the differentiating factor it can be. But it then warrants that you actually have folks who probably are not going to leave, by the way, will stay there. So you're probably looking at a founder, to be honest.
Yeah.
And also they need to have something, on their heart, on their mind that they want to talk about, and they need to be able to then talk about it. And then they also need to commit the time, right? So there's actually a lot of things that needs to fall into place for that to happen. You can bring a horse to water, but it doesn't mean it's going to drink, right? So you can jump through all the hoops, and it's just not necessarily going to work out. But I think if you're really playing the long game and understand, hey, this thing is going to take us 2 to 3 years for it to start paying dividends, then cool, by all means, go do that, right? But I think it's important to level set the expectation there.
It's a little bit like many people have this idea of like, ooh, we saw all of these people on LinkedIn posting and we're selling to like a B2B audience. So wouldn't it be great if our founder started posting on LinkedIn? Like the amount of resistance that you will encounter to get the person to do it is probably very little in comparison to the amount of resistance you will get to have this person be on the show like every week for an hour, right? And very quickly, as the results simply will not be coming in. Yeah. It will take some time. Very quickly, there will be this question hanging over your head of like, why are we doing this? Yeah. Kind of, why am I wasting my time on this? And I think once you're in this, questioning why to even do this cycle, it starts to become really difficult to produce high quality shows coming out of this and really giving this a push, right? Yeah. So I think that's probably one of the simple reasons. I think Another reason to do it that we actually found later on, kind of the purpose and kind of how the purpose evolved, was actually the community that we were able to build. Yeah, right. Access. And community for many people means, we have a Slack community and other people in there. It can be so many different things, right? So for example, you listening, you are to a degree part of the community. So this is, thanks for doing it, by the way. But there's also another side of the community, which is the creator side to it, right? Having Jaco on the show, having Cal Poya and Cal from Copy AI on the show, having, all of those people on the show, and sometimes once, twice, maybe even 3 times, Chris Walker was on the show twice. Like there's a couple of people that, when we started this out, we were like, oh, wow, those are really cool people. Yeah. And then getting the chance to chat with them and talk with them. And, you have the whole leading up to the recording, you have the one, recording uploads, kind of, there's a lots of other stuff that's still happening. You have their email address, you can ask them questions, they're way more available suddenly. You're kind of part of that creator economy in this B2B space, which, I'm not saying, they wouldn't be doing influencer jobs or something. That's not the right thing, but it's extremely interesting on the one hand side, but also you yourself start to become a little part of the in crowd. Yeah. Really, first of all, they know you, they kind of talk to one another, kind of, and maybe sometimes even talk about you. But the other thing is also you're on LinkedIn, you're following all of these guys, and you're starting to see what they're doing, what they're referencing, what they're referring to. And you're kind of starting to become really part of that community as well. Yeah. Which I felt was really fun, actually, instead of just being there and lurking and like reading and liking maybe sometimes, but actually kind of going into it and being part of it. So I think that is not only a nice thing to have, but it can also be leveraged into business, outcomes for you.
No, and I was just going to say, like, when we worked at Falcon, so the social media management vendor, we wanted to work with influencers, and immediately we would get but it's going to cost you £10,000. And it was always like that, even though we brought a bunch of other things to the table. And don't get me wrong, it's totally fair. If you want someone to advertise your selfish thing as a business, most likely it will come at a cost. And I think to a degree that can be okay. But I think the difference for us was we could all of a sudden say, hey, we're going to do an ebook about XYZ. You were on the show. Do you mind if we repurpose what we recorded and then promote it under your name? And like all kinds of doors to partnering opened up, which quite frankly just helped us with immense reach at the end of the day, right? I think that was like a superpower. There were other pieces where we could start talking about partner opportunities at the very early stage we're at, right? So I think that was immensely powerful as well, the kind of access it can give.
I think the other thing I just actually forgot to mention is I got way more, invited to be speaker at a conference, to be a guest on someone else's show. I mean, ultimately also how the creators discover new people on the show is by listening to other shows, being on LinkedIn, finding people that have something interesting to say. So that was kind of another upside actually. Yeah. And kind of almost brings me to the next point, which was guests, right? We didn't start the show out with guests. We kind of was just you and I chatting. And we see that there's a difference, right? I think kind of having a guest show, usually has more downloads, more interest than just us. Am I correct? Actually, Mikkel?
You know what? It's so funny. If you've considered hopping into doing a show, everyone will say, "Well, you shouldn't do guests because all the shows are with guests." And but you know what? It kind of also works. Like, why not? If it works, like, try it out, see for yourself, learn, and then adapt. Mm-hmm. I think it's really bad advice to say, like, no, you shouldn't do it in a certain way. And I think it also depends on your purpose. If you want to build the founder's brand, bringing on guests will naturally bring more focus on the guests, as it should, honestly, right? So you need to think a little bit about this setup there. But
to my question, like, do you actually know if guest episodes do better, generally speaking,
for us, yes. Yeah. But also sometimes you have, like, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You and I are just more excited that we spoke with Manny Medina from Outreach, and we had a great conversation. It was a wonderful guy, and then we want to promote it, right? So I think there's also some of that happening as well. So it's again, for us, it's definitely better. For some, maybe not. Like, maybe if someone already has a founder brand that is bigger than the guests you bring on, maybe you don't need to.
No, exactly. And I think my point was actually kind of working with guests is good. I think it also brings a different perspective into the show. Also, Mikkel and I kind of, we're still only just, two people. Having additional people bring their insights and their brains to this makes it so much more interesting for us, but also for the audience that's listening. I think in the very early beginning, we're like, oh, we're going to get all of those people on, and then they're going to promote the show and post this and do that.
Do all these.
And forget about it.
No.
Like, that's just not happening. So, I mean, it's usually, and I hope I'm not kind of stepping on anyone's toes. Like, the people that have the biggest reach, they are very much not so likely to promote you. Folks that have the smallest reach, they're kind of, hey, I was on the show, we talked about this, right? Kind of that usually kind of tends to happen. But it's like the bigger the guests are, the less likely they are to kind of try and promote, right?
But I think it's also, but it's if you look at a movie actor, the thing they're going to promote the most is the big movie they're a part of this year, not the little series appearance they did or the talk show or the whatever. They're going to promote the big thing. That's where they're going to go deep. And I think you just have to acknowledge also that no matter what industry you're in, there's probably an established show that is the big thing to appear on, which they, if the same guest that joined our show now goes and join, I don't know, again, Harry Steppings from 20VC, probably they're going to share that they're on that show just because of the street cred it will almost give comparatively, right? So I think you also have to acknowledge just where you are in the stage relative to others, and that's part of it. But expecting the guests to kind of carry the show, like, don't do it. You're doing yourself a disservice then.
But let's go to carrying the show, meaning in this case, really helping to grow it, right? Helping to grow the audience. So what are the things that we did in order to grow the audience?
Not much. We just posted and then done. No, honestly, we did.
Like every other marketer.
I mean, we did a ton of things, but it's all different stages, right? There's the initial state of just getting into the rhythm. And for us, it meant like producing a good episode and then also being able to promote it on LinkedIn and figuring out how do we get people from LinkedIn to then listen to the show. Difficult, by the way, right? But that was, I think, the first step. So we produced video snippets. We did all kinds of crazy things to try and drive attention to the show. I think when we started doing the newsletter, that also helped out. Not that we were actively promoting the podcast, but it just became part of that little world. Like, hey, I've bumped into Tony on LinkedIn. Now I'm on his newsletter and I just saw he has a podcast. Maybe I should check that out, actually. So I think that was just something there that started to mesh really nicely. And then I think obviously a big thing was actually the sticking with the habit of publishing. Like, I think as a listener, you get used to. So, by the way, true story, I know there are certain shows that has the exact same publishing cadence as us, right? So I'm building a habit on those shows because they publish every Tuesday, right? Yep. And I think it's the same for our audience. Not that they necessarily will go and say like, oh, on Tuesday, the new episode is coming. I can't wait. Like, I don't think that's what happens, but there's that kind of like.
I think that's what happens. They
lie awake at night the day before. But, I think that matters a great deal. And I think if you're inconsistent and people don't know what to expect, that is really tricky then to build up a habit as a listener. I think that was like the initial, let's say, now it's starting to work phase. Do you think there was anything else we did early on?
Yeah. So one thing is we deliberately chose for the two of us to have like a window of 25, 30 minutes because we wanted to get into this commute. Basically, we didn't want to, I'm sometimes listening to the New York Times podcast and it's like, it's an hour and a half. It's like, I need to go for like 3 runs before I'm done with that episode. It's by the way, it's nice, high quality. I love it and everything, but it wouldn't be great if just fit it into, one task that I do, for example. So I think that was very much a decision. And I think then the other thing, and we started this a little bit later, which is just such a rookie mistake. It's like asking people to subscribe.
Yes. You're right. That we kind of stunk at. Yeah,
but it's really this like, do you like this? When you watch YouTube and it says like,
asking for the sale. It's literally what it is. You got to do it.
No, I know, but everyone is like, oh, this is kind of advertisement.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it works. It actually works because the thing is really what you do is, and we started to have this habit in general, when you and I do marketing together. It's like, you have to ask for what you want.
Yeah.
You have to ask for it. And it doesn't always need to be the CTA in your LinkedIn post, like, book a demo now or something. That doesn't work. But if you want something, you have to ask for it, right? It's not just going to happen to you. So, and that apparently is true. Not just have we figured this out, but also everyone else has figured this out, right? This is one thing. And then the other thing also on the, you gotta ask for it is like ask for reviews. I think 2 weeks ago or so, we had our first negative review, right? I actually need to still write this guy and apologize, actually.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and did you reply? Did you not?
Yeah, I did.
Did you
No, he didn't reply. No, he did not.
He was like, Mikkel, you're a loser. I had one bad episode. I'm not going to talk to you. No, but, ask for the review and then the review, sorry, cut, and the review and the subscribe and all of that stuff. That helps you on these different platforms to get more reach there, to get up in the search rankings, to maybe get into the top 4 business podcasts on Apple in your region. And there's a couple of those things actually where it helps you a lot with. So don't underestimate that. Don't underestimate there. And there's so many other places where you can be found, right? And I gotta say, what we started the last thing we started is actually YouTube. Put those things on YouTube. It takes a little bit more time cutting it and making it right. We have a full, studio setup running here now, and it requires a little bit of a different camera. There's a couple of things that you need to do, but it's another network. And it's our fastest growing network right now as well.
Yeah,
right? I'm not sure, if people want to see us or if they're just starting to transition to YouTube and it's like it's just there, they have it in their pocket. I'm not sure exactly what happens there, but we get a lot of views actually from YouTube, right? And adding those networks takes some time and some effort, right? We also went to the Spotify video version and stuff, so that it takes some effort, but it certainly helps you with your user acquisition or with your viewership or audience acquisition, basically, right? So again, you create a piece of content. Maybe it starts with a LinkedIn post. You then realize, let's build a full episode out of this. Yeah. And then once you have the full episode, you need to use it on as many different places in order to push the message out, right? So, and I think those were some of the tactics we chose to use in order to grow the show.
Yeah. And I mean, we've done a bunch of other things that didn't work out. And that's part of it. You try so many different things. And
what did we try that didn't work out? Didn't everything work out, Mikkel?
Probably. Yeah, let's just assume that. I've forgotten all the losses.
I think, the guest thing didn't work out, right? We were thinking like they're going to cross-post this everywhere on Blue Sky and X and everywhere. It was like, no.
But it did help grow the show also because I think it gives some different perspectives, quite frankly. And then I think people find the casual conversation. I hope they find the casual conversation fun. That's a big part of the show, right? And
what was the and we kind of need to wrap up here in a second, but what was the biggest surprise for me? So when I talked to a couple of people that actually kind of listened to the show, they were saying something along the lines of, and I'm not saying that that's fully true, but they were saying something like, you and I are funny.
What? No, that can't be right. Yeah. You must have misheard. This is your German dialect or something that screwed you. That can't be right. Can't be right. So, don't believe it.
And that being one of the reasons why they're kind of listening, because it's like, okay, let's talk about quick payback. I mean, it's really, it's actually boring. Fun? It's boring stuff actually, right? So it's like, I think if you hit this balance of like infotainment or edutainment, I think then I think that can also be helpful.
But you know what? I also think like if we ever get invited to do an episode at a conference again, I'm just going to say, hey, sure, let's do it. We can't really guarantee that we get to any subject matter because we just get stuck in casual conversation. And number two, we kind of need to have some beers on the stage just to, you know, chill down the vibes of this conference stuff, you know, anyway. So I think just the last reflection for me, at least, it's, you know, we obviously bias towards a podcast because we're already at a point now where it's kind of working, right? It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. I've seen folks try and shortcut it and instead basically hire someone outside of the company to build that show, right? And I think if that's your consideration, you might as well just go and sponsor, honestly, because you still get a lot of overhead in terms of managing the show, who is effectively promoting it, and quite frankly, what expert are you building up? Not someone who's part of your team. Then I would rather say what Drift did back in the day was almost, I would say, an employee perk. If someone raised their hand and wanted to start a show, it felt like there was support to then help them produce it at the end of the day. And I think that is a different approach instead to take. So should you start a podcast? Maybe. Don't know. If you're at least thinking about sponsoring one, and you have an audience that's go-to-market leaders in software, then hit me and Tony up. We obviously have sponsor slots.
Wow. I mean, we didn't even prepare for that. That was actually not the idea of the show.
Oh, no.
We can cut it
out.
Nickel.
We can cut it out.
Well done. Like, so, yeah, I think we have like a sponsorship slot actually opening up. If someone is interested, just hit us up on LinkedIn. Happy to help you out. Otherwise, thank you so much for listening, everyone. Mikkel, thanks for having this conversation. I'm so happy I'm going to be rid of you now after this episode is done. And sorry, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and thanks for 200 episodes. I look forward to the next 200.
Honey, thank you so much for the last 200. And here is to the next 1,000, you know. Thanks, everyone else. Have a good one, and bye-bye.
Bye.